Welcome to the walking tour of Mendon's Old Cemetery. Old Cemetery is almost as old as her town. Only 2 years after Mendon's incorporation in 1667, the old burying ground, as the founders called her, was established. We've chosen only a few of the 260 gravestones that were identified and documented in a 1912 study to share with you today. So many other interesting stories of our ancestral families that are interred here remain to be told. Thanks to the Mendon Historical Society for this exciting and heartfelt walking tour of Old Cemetery. We're welcoming everybody to the walking tour of Old Cemetery in Mendon, Massachusetts. Our forefathers called it the Old Burying Ground. And what we have before us is all of our leaders, all of our families from the 1800s, at least most of them. I want to welcome all of you to this great walking tour of Old Cemetery in Mendon, Massachusetts, which our forefathers called the burying ground. And the burying ground sort of reveals the truth that there are places in this cemetery that are unmarked. So it's a very sacred place, it's a very honored place, and we're here today to honor our leaders, our founders, their families, and those other people that we don't know that are at rest here before us all. Only two years before our 350th anniversary, and we're here honoring our past. Thank you for coming. This is going to be a good experience. We promise to make this tour respectful, informative, heartfelt, interesting, and fun. That's why we brought Mr. Dick Grady, Mr. History Guy of Mendon, right? So he's here to add his typical jokes and quips as we pass through our headstones. But I'd like to introduce you some of Mendon's historic elites. Right here, we have Amy DeWitt and Jane Lowell, current members of the Mendon Historical Society and co-founders of Preservation Mendon. Other tour guides, Janice Muldoon Moores, David Lowell, her other half right now. She's the better half. We have Ruth Castanelli right here. And we have Bob Carlson. Bob Carlson, he was involved in a 1989 walking tour of Old Cemetery, and he can tell you all about it. So there's a lot of good history amongst all of these people. First, I want to introduce Amy DeWitt, that's going to tell you a little bit about introductory information. Amy?
This graveyard, Old Cemetery, was established by vote by the town of Mendon on February 2nd, 1669. It's the oldest graveyard within the original bounds of the town. Mendon's early pioneers all settled within roughly 2 miles of this yard, and as Mendon historian Marcus Aldrich said, "In the main, their mortal dust probably lieth here." The land in the area near this cemetery was cleared pasture land surrounded by woods. The roads that we now see were only widened cart paths in the 1660s. Daniel Lovett owned the pasture on which the cemetery was first used. He owned the western side of what is now Providence Road until it bordered Matthias Puffer's farmland farther south near the King Philip War Monument, which is at the intersection of Hartford Avenue East and Providence. George Aldrich, a Quaker, owned the eastern side, particularly the land with the triangle of what is now George Street, Gaskell Street, and Providence Road behind us over here. School Meadow is just east of us on the left side of George Street on land now owned by Shelley Vincent, so right back here. And later we'll find out why this is called School Meadow. Abraham Staples was the owner of land in the center of town. Joseph White owned the area near Founders Park, where our first meeting house was erected in 1668. The town's Noon House was situated just south of the current Founders Park, probably just north of Joseph White's very helpful saw pit. And for those of you, do you know what a saw pit is? Yep. Okay. All right. I was going to have Dick describe. Okay. Old Cemetery itself has boundaries of Willowbrook to the west behind us and Main Street to the east. Metcalfe's Annals of Mendon tells us that in 1694 it was voted that Jacob Aldrich might improve this tract of land laid out for a burying place, and that it be enclosed with a 5-rail fence to keep farm animals away, primarily swine and cattle.
Are you looking at Dick Grady when you say that?
I'm trying not to screech.
The Undertaker's true colors are coming out.
It was also agreed that Deacon Warfield of George Street, who was Mendon's first schoolmaster, would have permission to cross the cemetery land to get water from Willow Brook. The fence was not to impede his passage. A schoolhouse was built adjacent to Mr. Warfield's home in 1709, which is how School Meadow came to be School Meadow, on the north side of George Street.
Couple of housekeeping things first, right? If you all have a handout, you'll notice there's a quiz in the back of the handout. We've already told you some answers that are on that quiz. If you do the quiz and get, 100%, right? There's grand prizes for everybody that achieves 100%. And also, there's a bonus question for those that only get 90% for an extra 10 points. So just to know that you can't get out of here until you finish this quiz. No, okay, you can go home, do it at home. It's a take-home quiz, all right. Another thing is that when I'm not talking, not speaking, we've done this nice little presentation, which is a combination of the handout and the script and a bunch of pictures of Old Cemetery. Pictures, all this is going to be donated in honor of the Mendon Historical Society to the Taft Public Library when it's finished. So it's a lovely thing, and I'll be showing some of these pictures when I'm not speaking. We were promised by the weather people there was going to be sun. Just imagine yourself in a sunny day, right? So here it is. Right behind Bob Carlson, we have what we call the receiving tomb. The receiving tomb was dedicated in 1855. 1855, only a few years past Mendon's golden age.
Excuse me,
Yes,
what is this? What did you call this tomb?
a receiving tomb, and I'm going to tell you all about it right now. That's a great question. And this is an interactive session, so great question, right? Metcalfe's Annals, and we all know John Metcalfe, right? He wrote the Annals of Mendon, states that on March 5th, 1855, it was, I quote, voted to build a receiving tomb for the use of the town. Metcalfe, Taft, Perry Wood were chosen a committee of 3 to erect said tomb at an expense not to exceed $200, and to get it all done by August of that year. And I guess they did a pretty good job doing it. We all know that receiving tombs were used pretty much as a temporary spot for bodies for short periods, most especially if it was the dead of winter, with frozen ground, or if the grave was not ready, or if the body had to be sent somewhere else. Also, storing a body in a receiving tomb had the added perk of preventing the dead from being buried alive, if in fact they were not dead. For example, interesting point, the 17th century saw a number of premature burials. Collapse and apparent death were not uncommon during epidemics of plague, cholera, and smallpox. We all remember. From contemporary medical sources, historian William Tebb compiled 219 instances of narrow escape of premature burial and 149 cases of actual premature burial. Wow. Listen to this one. Some instances were especially heartbreaking. For instance, in the 1850s, roughly the same time that our receiving tomb was dedicated, there was a little girl down in South Carolina, and she surrendered to diphtheria. She was quickly interred in a local family's receiving tomb, pretty much just like ours, because it was feared the disease might otherwise spread. That's good. Some years later, when her brother died in the devastating Civil War, the door of the tomb was open. A tiny skeleton was found on the floor just behind that door. So can you picture that getting up? So what we tried to do today, and we weren't able, is because that door weighs 800 pounds, we were going to open it for you, but we couldn't get the door open.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you know why the pipe is coming up?
Yes, that's a good one. Good. So, bodies, temporary resting place, mostly for the cold weather, but sometimes they didn't get to it. So bodies, rotting, smelling, air, etc. Was that too gross? No. Okay. All right. Mark Twain once stated that in order to know a community, one must observe style of its funerals and know what manner of men and women they bury with the most ceremony. Our intent today is to share Mendon's stories, helping us to really know our community. Mendon has been blessed throughout the years with very special people that were great stewards of her past. Names such as Marcus Aldridge, Florence Aldridge, Abraham Staples, Julius A. George, Dr. John Metcalf, Reverend Carlton Staples, and numerous others come to mind. To paraphrase Isaac Newton, if all of us, and you, appear to see far into the past, it's only because we stand on the shoulders of historical giants, and we do. One Mendon protector of the past, who was in our midst not so very long ago, was E. Jane Coleman. She was always there with her friendliness and guardianship of Mendon's antiquity. She was a real trooper. Now we're going to take and walk a little bit, so please be careful of the ground. We're going up to the entryway.
Good afternoon. A large number of the Revolutionary War soldiers are buried here at the old cemetery. You'll remember that 119 of Mendon's finest mustered at the Founders Park on April 19, 1775, marched off to the Roxbury at the start of the American Revolution. On August 7, 1912, the Mendon Historical Society located and marked about 40 of them with the SAR markers, soldiers of the American Revolution. Although weathered, they still mark these grave sites respectfully to this day. Captain William Torrey's gravesite resides at the old cemetery. He was the great-grandfather of President Taft. It should be noted that President Taft sent a check to the Mendon Historical Society to pay for his SAR markers placed in his ancestors' graves.
So anyway, the cemetery today looks very nice. well cared for by the Parks Department. Not always the case. I suspect that when the burials started happening down in Swandale, this cemetery was pretty much abandoned. Along comes 1910. President Taft visits Mendon, Massachusetts, because, of course, his Taft ancestors settled here in 1669, and as John just said, some of his relatives are buried here. Anyway, when he got here, it was overgrown. It looked awful. There's one nice vision here of a stone in the middle of a tree. Finally, in 1912, the selectmen got together and spent some money and refurbished this cemetery. And that doesn't mean that it stayed refurbished after 1912, because some of us remember seeing it kind of overgrown and not too many years ago. But anyway, Taft made several stops in the Mendon area. One of the places he visited was the homestead site up on Millville Road.
So they left here. He was pretty upset at things, right? How did
Yes.
they get back to the town that he was upset? Did he email them or what?
I believe he sent them a letter.
Sent them a letter, right? I think I read that the president, as he left here, he went down to visit some of his ancestral homes, like Luther Taft, right? And they chatted in front on the porch, right?
Absolutely.
And they took photographs of each other. Was that a selfie day?
It was not.
It was not a selfie. After President Taft visited with his relatives at his ancestral home on Millville Road, the President Taft, Governor Draper entourage returned to Founders Park for the dedication of the Founders Memorial donated by the Mendon Historical Society. Following the dedication, we have an interesting interchange with President Taft as narrated here by Susan Ober of the Taft lineage.
After the dedication of the Mendon Memorial, Mrs. Swan approached President Taft, and she was a friend of my grandmother's, Mary Taft, who had just had a baby boy and was hoping that the president would name her son. So the president was pleased with that proposal, and he named my uncle Robert after his son Robert. And that same year, he sent a letter to my grandfather, and it said, "Dear Mr. Taft, today I am sending you for little Robert Taft a signed photograph of myself. May the little fellow grow to vigorous manhood and enjoy a long and useful life." And then in 1928, after Robert's father had passed away, a Mrs. Pond sent him a letter, and he returns this letter to my uncle. "Dear Robert, Mrs. Anna H. Pond has written me with enthusiasm of your course in high school, and to say that you and your brother Jesse deserve great credit for carrying on keeping the farm while you attend school. I am very glad to hear this, and I am sure that the habits you form will continue to practice them. You will justify the promise which Mrs. Pond is confident of. With very best wishes, sincerely yours, President Taft."
What a great story, right? What's your name? Susan Ober. Thank you, Sue. Your mother was a Taft. Wonderful story.
It was her mother.
It was her mother. Okay, so now we're going to walk to the obelisk in the center of the cemetery.
He died when he was 65 years old, and he and his wife, Mary Randall, were one of the first 15 families who settled here in Nitmock Plantation, which is now known as Mendon, and that was back in 1663. And their home is located just a short distance from here, about where our present post office is over here. And this property extended from where the Baptist Church is currently located to the site of Sunrise Apartments on Blackstone Street. It included the library and the town hall area. And of course, none of these buildings are in existence then. But their first child, Abraham Jr., was born in June, and he was the very first new baby born in the town of Mendon. Abraham was a weaver by trade, but in order to survive in the new isolated frontier town, he and his wife had to create their own self-sustaining farm. They had to provide for all their food by land clearing, by growing crops and hunting. They had to make their own clothing, chop their wood, construct their home and barn and sheds. They had to build fences to keep their farm animals from escaping and to keep wild animals like wolves from attacking. They had to work with other families to create roads and establish a place to worship together and to meet together to deal with their common issues. Their neighbor was Joseph White, and he dug a saw pit that he shared to saw logs into wooden planks. By May of 1667, after more families had moved into this town, the General Court granted the Frontier Settlement Incorporation as a town, and its nearest neighbor was Medfield. They were separated by 15 miles of forest. A year later, in 1668, the first meeting house was built by Joseph White's land. Today it's known as Founders Park. Abraham Staples held several town offices, and he served as a sergeant in the Mendon militia. After the first attack by Metunas and his group of Nipmuc warriors on July 14, 1675, Abraham brought his family back to Weymouth in anticipation of more carnage and to keep them safe. Two prominent descendants, Reverend Carlton Staples and the Honorable Hamilton B. Staples, dedicated this monument in honor of their ancestor on October 31st, 1877.
So now we're going to walk up towards where the fourth meeting house was, that fourth meeting house, and then we're going to stop at the Reverend Grindell Rawson's gravestone, way up by the barn. Going close, very close, very close.
Right, this is one of two above-the-ground tombs in the cemetery. It's the tomb of Grindell Rawson, who was the second settled minister in Mendon. And interestingly enough, it's right back up to the site of the, this is not it, but the site of the fourth meeting house in Mendon. Grindell Rawson took the ministry in 1680 when the Mendon settlers returned after the devastation of King Philip's War in 1676, where the entire town was burned to the ground. He was only 22 years old when he came back to become the minister in Mendon, and he had quite a task ahead of him. He had no church, he had no meeting house, he had no congregation. So he, the town was in ruins, and the former minister, the Reverend Joseph Emerson, had fled to Concord and decided not to come back. Probably a wise choice under the circumstances. But anyway, let's see now. His first task, of course, was to get a new meeting house built and reestablished. The homes were rebuilt. The settlers had been, actually had asked permission when King Philip started burning and pillaging to move back to Weymouth and Braintree, and Boston said no, but they went anyway. They came back gradually, and the congregation was reestablished. By 1684, the selectmen offered Grindal a contract to be the second settled minister. He was paid 55 pounds, 15 pounds in sterling, and the other 40 pounds providing for a place to live and food, etc. The people in Mendon were very pleased with their scholarly, pious young minister, and they renewed his contract year after year. He was also held in high esteem by state officials. He was asked numerous times to assist on issues, particularly dealing with interactions with the Native Americans. He learned the Nipmuc language and culture and helped the Reverend John Eliot, who was the
Apostle
Reverend
to the
John-
Indians. That's
Excuse
what he
me?
was. That's the term.
Yes. Right. Anyway. What is it? What is it?
Apostle to the Indians.
Apostle to the Indians, yes. Apostle to the Indians. Grindal Rawson died in 1715 after providing spiritual guidance to his congregation for 35 years. He helped the war-torn, fire-devastated people rebuild their homes and their lives. After his wife Susanna passed, the town ordered the special couple with a long-lasting memorial of a portrait stone, and this is very unusual. We're hoping to get this stone covered in some way so that the elements are not going to be eroding. There aren't too many portrait stones. The other tomb, the other above-the-ground tomb, actually is one of his niece and nephew called Pern and Pern Rawson. One was 12 and one was 13 years old, and it was not unusual at the time if one child died to rename the other one after the first one that died. So this tomb is in quite good shape. The other one is falling apart at this point. You'll see when we walk down that way, and that's going to be reconstructed fairly soon. Anyway, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you said that after the massacre, right, 1676,
Yes.
and in February they were burned to the ground, right?
They were.
And they wanted to leave and go back to protection, right? Weymouth, Braintree, etc. And the government said, no, you can't leave. We
Right.
want you to stay there in harm's way.
Yep.
Now, is that the first time the government told the people to do something they didn't want to do?
It's not the last. Are you a libertarian, John? Yes.
Do you know where the parsonage was? Where he lived?
I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, up on Hastings Street. Wasn't it on Hastings Street, Dick? I'm thinking it was on Hastings Street, is that?
Where
The
Grindal
parsonage.
Rawson lived.
Where was his parsonage?
Okay, I think up by Hood Plaza.
By Hood Plaza. Okay. All right. Good question. Yeah. Good
Was he
question.
actually that?
Excuse me?
Was he actually that short?
No. This is just set on top of where he was buried. No, he was not. I don't know, actually. I've never seen Grindal, but I'm assuming.
They stood him up straight, absolutely. They were smart guys back then. That's right.
That would save some ground.
Yeah, I love the
for sure.
idea.
Yep.
And now we don't have to walk very far to Joseph Dorr's gravesite, right here.
Now you can see some of the art on these stones.
Reverend Joseph Thor, June 22nd, 1690 to March 9, 1768, age 79. The Reverend Joseph Thor Sr. succeeded Grindal Rawson to become Mendon's third settled minister from 1716 through 1767. His church was the third meeting house at Founders Park from 1690 until 1736, when the fourth meeting house was finally constructed at the north end of Old Cemetery. The move of the meeting house location was caused much controversy and bitterness to the town. Meaning voters went back and forth. A barrel of rum was brought in to add to the negotiations and to win the opponents over. Once a final favorable vote was taken and construction began, a disgruntled opponent snuck into the partially built building structure and axed some of the timber, but it didn't fall. Marks were left, but the attempts at sabotage was unsuccessful. Religious services and a town meeting soon followed, but many people in colonial Mendon were not happy about the new location. Joseph married Mary Rawson, Rendell's second daughter, in 1724. They had 5 children, including Joseph Jr., who was most famous. He was the town's schoolmaster in 1750 and became the state representative in 1760, when he developed a friendship with the Boston revolutionary Samuel Adams. He had several other Mendon residents become deeply involved in the early activities of the American Revolution, working hand in hand with the Sons of Liberty.
You're not talking about defending your rights as Englishmen. You're talking about a new country. All the colonies united. A new nation.
The rest of Joseph Dorr died in March 9th, 1768, and Mary died on April 9th, 1776. They were buried a few feet from her parents' graves and only a few feet from the fourth meeting house.
Son of Liberty, along with Sam Adams and those people that you know from the Revolution. You might have heard of the 19 Mendon Resolves. The 19 Mendon Resolves. So, what were they? The Committee of Correspondence, of course, said, hey guys, it's time for us to separate, right? And of course, steering up all of the activity, Joseph Dorr was the local participant, along with another, Edward Rawson, and the stories about the meetings, the town meetings that occurred in the fourth meeting house, which was located right here, are astounding, astounding. The 19 Mendon Resolves, if you read them, and then you read the Declaration of Independence, you can look down there and say, that's verbatim. He was an orator, he was a writer, he documented, he was perfect. In other words, a protector of Mendon's past. We're going to now march just a little bit over there to the west to the Sarah and Joseph Prince graves.
Sarah and Joseph Prince. Joseph, 1753 to November 24th, 1828, age 75. And Sarah, 1776 to September 22nd, 1833, age 57. Joseph and Sarah Prince lived in Mendon Village Center.
Can't hear you, Bob.
Jane, turn him on. We shut off his speaker. It's not right.
Just so you can hear.
The speaker.
Oh, I did it so it fell apart.
Turn him on, Ruth. Turn
Turn
him on.
Turn it on. Turn it on.
Test.
Okay. Joseph and Sarah Prince lived in Mendon Village Center in the 1820s during the town's golden age. They lived in a house at what is now 3 Hastings Street. Joseph was a retired colonel in the Continental Army. Their adjacent neighbors were Ebenezer Hayward, who was a bank cashier, and attorney Seth Hastings, who was a bank president. The 3 Hastings Street is in front of Blessing Barn, previously the Mendon Country Gift Barn. Joseph died in 1828, and Sarah passed away in 1833. Their daughter, Sarah, sold the family home to Dr. Joseph Metcalf, who lived there for 59 years until his death in 1892. That's it. But I want to just say one thing. You notice the biggest monument in this cemetery is a sergeant. Most of the time, other cemeteries, the officers that get the big glamorous mornings. But this is one of the few where we sergeants got it over to brass. And there's a lot of brass buried in, a lot of officers buried in here. So there must be few we can get to this day down there. Yeah, he had a lot of money someplace. Thank you.
In front of Ichabod and Philip Amidon headstone grave sites, right? And it's apropos that David Lowell tell us about Ichabod and Philip Amidon because of Amidon Tavern.
We were supposed to try this earlier, so you didn't know. So anyway, here we are. This is Ichabod Amidon's stone right here, and it's really a fancy job with cutting all the way down the sides. Very unusual. And, so he was born in 1704 and died in 1789, September 24th, 1789. And he misses Washington's visit by a month, just about a month. Well, they know, just a couple of weeks. Now he built that tavern in 1745, and it was a stopover for travelers on the Middle Post Road. It would be a great place for them to spend the night and get a meal and get some rest and maybe do a little shopping while they were there, you know? Fine antiques. Never mind. So anyway, he passes and his son Philip Amidon takes over. And it is Philip who has the misfortune of owning a tavern when it turned away George Washington. Of course, they were expecting him to show up, and when he finally appeared, the lady that answered the door didn't recognize him, and she said, "I'm sorry, we're expecting somebody important." And so he continued on his way and spent the night in Uxbridge at the Taft Tavern on Sutton Street, not the Uxbridge Inn.
David?
Yes, John.
Do you know the reason Philip left and went away that day? Why did he go away?
Oh, yes. He was...
was he meeting somebody?
Well, he was trying to find some entertainment for Washington. We don't know if he went to Providence or not. But listen, we'll stop it right there. But we can imagine what he might have said to the lady that turned Washington away when he got back.
You're fine.
And now let me introduce Janice Muldoon Morse to tell us all about Peter Penniman.
Well, as we've kind of learned, Massachusetts was kind of the hotbed of insurgency. So when the Acts of Parliament came through and the harbor was closed down and General Gage took over as the governor of Massachusetts, a provisional Congress was established with something called committees of correspondence. And that was the way towns communicated with one another. And they had a whole bunch of spies out into the British trying to find out what they were doing. So they heard that General Gage was going to be sending an army out to Concord and Lexington, because Concord was where the colonists had been storing extra munitions so that they would be ready for the time when they were to take up arms. And then Lexington was where Sam Adams and John Hancock were hiding. So they got word that this was going to happen, and just as Paul Revere was running through the towns, word was going through these committees of correspondence to all the towns to tell them that they needed to send their militia. So when Mendon heard that on April 19th, they called up there, as you mentioned, 164 soldiers, and about a third of them were Minutemen, meaning that they actually had to be ready at a minute's notice to march, and they were. So they all got together at Founders Park, and they took the Middle Post Road to Boston. There's like an upper post and a lower post, but they went right in the middle to Lexington and Roxbury, where they fought. Now, Henneman was one of the leaders of the group that had trained. They trained like 3 times a week to get ready for this. And he was one of the people in the Revolutionary Army that actually became a captain. He worked in 4 different companies over a period of 4 years in the Revolutionary Army. And he retired in 1779. When he retired, he came back here to Mendon, and he worked his farm, which was on Blackstone Street. And he had like apple orchard, walnut orchard. He had chickens, about 25 cows, and he had a cranberry bog. And it was later written in a brochure when the place was being sold that it's just as natural for cranberries to grow in this bog as it is for hares to grow in a horse. So that's how they described things back then. But while he was farming, he also got into Massachusetts politics and was in the legislature, was a representative, then became a senator. And then when he was a senator, he was elected, there was called a governor's council. And it was a group of 9 senators that were elected within that group, and he became a member of that council. When he finally retired from there, or he was retired, I think, he became very active in Mendon politics and took almost any position he could find to work there. And then he finally died in 1805, and he's buried here with different members of his family.
You can see
a true revolutionary.
The true patriot, true
and he
revolutionary.
Should have that hat.
And
Patriot.
Peter Penniman, where does Peter Penniman's house reside again? Do you know anything about it? Do you live there? Yes, you do. And Janice told you a little bit about preparation for the battles, right? The revolution, right? We all know, right? Lexington conquered. They stored munitions all around the place. Okay, yeah, keep them away from the regulars. And by the way, they said the regulars were coming. They didn't say the British were coming, because they were all British at the time, you'll all recall, right? So, munitions dumps. There were 7 outer munitions dumps around outside of the 128 belt, Lexington Concord area, more like the 495 belt. Mendon had its own munitions dump down by the Barney Field, like the cow place down on Providence Road. We do some memorial things there. So, why did Mendon get chosen? Well, yeah, because we were active in the Revolution. Joseph Dorr, Edward Rawson, etc. And so there's a munitions dump down there. We can actually see some of the stones and the granite that they had sort of just west of Providence Road. So an interesting point of information about how historic your Mendon is.
Seth Davenport built a farmhouse in 1793 that became the family homestead and the center of a very productive and profitable agricultural business that would last for several generations. The Davenports were superb farmers and marketers. Through hard work, intelligent business dealings, and the good fortune to own 212 very rich acres of rich North Avenue farmland, they provided food for the region and distant cities as well. Their excellence in agricultural endeavors rewarded them with substantial wealth, and they had high social status in the Mendon community. The farmhouse at 133 North Avenue was a symbol of the family's prosperity. It was large scale with many rooms and a granite foundation. It was located across the street from the headwaters of Muddy Brook, and it overlooked the long stretch of pastures and meadows that gradually sloped down to the south flowing brook. Its land extended from the Upton town line to North Bridge Road on both sides of North Avenue. For many years, it remained as a cornerstone of agricultural success. By 1793, the new farmstead was completed. It remained as a Davenport home and center of farming activity for many years. As the families grew, more farmhouses were built and new business practices expanded. Seth Jr. married Betsy Godfrey in 1797. He promoted fruit growing and specialized in Rhode Island greening apples that were very popular in the Boston markets. Benjamin built a farmhouse for his family at 73 North Avenue in 1820. His specialty was dairy farming. Seth Jr.'s son Joseph built a house at 101 North Avenue. George constructed farmhouses at both 85 and 100 North Avenue. And Austin, who lived at the homestead, was a dealer in dairy cows, horses, and cider. The cider refined at his farm was sold in markets as far away as California. The family business of farming was obviously healthy and prosperous. The 1793 homestead and other Davenport farmhouses on North Avenue and Misco Road are symbols of Mendon's economic strength from the 1700s through the early 1900s. But by 1920, the economy had been changed by the trolley and the automobile. Farmland was sold and houses were built, and later a regional school was constructed. The last Davenport farm was Sunnyside Farm, operated by George Godfrey Davenport and Sons. The existing houses, barns, and stone walls are subtle reminders of a great family that was the backbone of Mendon's agricultural way of life. They call to mind the town's great history of glory days gone by.
The Davenports were big-time farmers and entrepreneurs, all right. A continuation of the hard-working agrarian Mendon lifestyle that some old-timers recollect from the not-too-distant past. Mendon's Paul Doucette has been collecting milk bottles for years. He has acquired numerous Mendon Dairy Farm bottles, including a couple specific to the Davenport and the Sunnyside farms.
Hi everybody, I think you all know my name. It's Paul Doucette, and as you can see from this series, Mendon was an agricultural town, and dairying was a big part of that way of life. The Davenports had especially two very interesting large farms in Mendon. One was located, Sunnyside Farm was located on the corner of North Ave and Misco Road, and directly across the street was the Davenport Farm, which was on the corner of Hopedale Street. Sunnyside Farm produced, processed, and bottled their own milk, and they sold it to vendors and peddled it around town. And Davenport Farm did not bottle its own milk, but sold it to an outside vendor. Inside here in this milk carrier's case, I have three very interesting Davenport bottles. The first is what we call a square milk bottle because of the shape of it. And this one has beautiful green painted or lettering, and on it it's a full label, what I call a full label, because it tells you where the name of the dairy and where it was located, which was Mendon, Mass. And it also has the proprietor's name, George D. Davenport. It's green and it's on both sides of the bottle. The second one here is what is a two-color bottle. The front is red, Davenport Sunnyside Farm, Mendon, Mass, full label. On the back, there's a slogan, in orange, which I can't read, but anyway, there's a slogan to help sell their milk, and it's in orange. So you got two different colors on front and back of the bottle. The third bottle is a banded, it has a copper band around the neck milk bottle which has been soldered on, and it has the customer's name on it. And the reason for that was that certain customers who were very fussy wanted their specific bottle back. So what they would do was wash it, leave the band on, and give it back to the customer when it was complete and filled with milk. If, as Doug Taylor once told me, he had worked for McGoffey Farm for years in Mendon, if one of these bottles broke, they had to take the band off and get a new bottle and solder the band on with the customer's name. And what that would do would slow the process down of bottling and capping the milk. So it would take much longer. It was a pain in the neck. These are all fine examples of milk bottles from Mendon. And in particular, they're very colorful, they're in great condition, and they're a good collectible item. I especially like on this is the round one, which I didn't mention, but what we call round. But on the banded bottle, there's a nice old-fashioned telephone that a lot of us here remember when we used to have to dial. You see here? And it's pictured with their telephone number on the back. Well, it's getting late, folks. I gotta finish my route. I started for the interview here, and I've gotta get back on the road. So I hope and I know you'll enjoy the rest of the show while I'm away. Take care, folks. Oh.
For those to whom much has been given, much will be expected. And that exemplifies the Hastings family, who had been blessed with wealth, academic ability, professional sophistication, social rank, and political influence. Though they were well-to-do, they readily gave service to their local, state, and national governments. They also gave generously to their town and to their church. They were part of Mendon's nobility. To the Hastings family, much had been given, and from themselves much was expected. Yet throughout their lives, there were lingering episodes of tragedy and sadness. In spite of their stature in the community, there were prevailing reminders that they were mortal. The Hastings family was regarded as one of the most distinguished families in the town of Mendon. Seth graduated from Harvard University in 1782. He passed the bar exam and he has established a law practice in Mendon. Then in 1796, he married Chloe Davenport. He built a law office in 1820, and in 1825 he became president of the town's first bank. He was also the owner of a bakery. His son William Hastings also graduated from Harvard and was admitted to the bar in 1820. He had another son, Charles Hastings, who graduated from Brown University in 1825, became a lawyer, and joined the family business. His daughter Mary married attorney Caleb Haywood, and the four barristers practiced law together in the small brick building at 13 Main Street. Seth Hastings' devotion to public service was exemplary. He became town treasurer in 1794 and a member of the first school committee in 1796. He worked on a committee to create Hartford Turnpike, and he made sure that it went through Mendon, as had Middle Post Road, the interstate roadway that it replaced. He defended the town against lawsuits by Bellingham and Uxbridge. In addition, he was elected to 2 terms in the U.S. Congress and later as a senator in the Massachusetts State Senate. He was also Chief Justice in the Worcester County Court of Sessions. He donated the land and a generous amount of money for the construction of the Unitarian Church in 1820. He was an extraordinary public servant. Following the fine example of his father, the sons also devoted their lives to service of others. William served as postmaster in the family law office, and from 1825 to 1836, and at the same time managed to be a state representative, and then he was state senator. He moved to Virginia in 1836 and was elected there to 3 terms in Congress. His brother Charles and Caleb Haywood served on the school committee here, and also the road commission and a committee to create a house for the poor. Their devotion and energy were most commendable. However, in spite of all their achievements, the family had to endure many sorrows and periods of grief. Seth and Chloe lost their 15-month-old son Seth in 1807 when he stopped breathing due to a piece of apple being lodged in his windpipe. The following year, Chloe died of consumption at age 34, leaving Seth and several small children. Daughter Hannah died 4 years later at age 12. Daughter Chloe died at age 19. William died at 44, and so did Charles. Charles's wife Anna was so distraught over all this that she and her 4 children had to move out of their 7 Maple Street home, and they moved over to 6 Hastings Street. Mary's husband Caleb died at age 37, and her daughter died at age 15. Their devastation was unimaginable. Members of the Hastings family made good use of their numerous talents to improve the lives of others. Instead of simply basking in the wealth of a prestigious private law firm, they worked with local government and carried out their goodwill. Coinciding with their benevolence was an ongoing bereavement that pervaded their lives, one tragedy after another. Perhaps their strength in dealing with their sorrow was the source that fueled their uncommon enthusiasm for public service. Mendon Village Center was essentially a family compound for the Hastings Davenport family in the early 1800s. Today, the village is their living tribute. Edna St. Vincent Millay's poem, titled First Fig, offers a summary of the lives of this highly respected Mendon family. Edna writes, quote, "My candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night. But ah, my foes and oh, my friends, it gives a lovely light." Over to you, John.
Seth was instrumental in making sure that Mendon stayed the center of attention in central Massachusetts. Now, he said, okay, people wanted to change the roads again, right? George Washington, 1789, comes through here in his post-inaugural trip, right? Wasn't enamored with the roads, right? Didn't like them between sort of a little bit to the east and all the way to Oxford. That's us, right? And he says, do something about it. And so Seth and a whole bunch of others got to meet together in Ashford, Connecticut in 1796 to talk about where the Hartford Turnpike would go from Boston to Hartford to New York. And so if it wasn't going to go through Mendon, what was going to happen? You're going to lose commerce, right? So where the money is, where the travel is, where the buck is, he said, I want to make sure that Mendon was center stop. So the stagecoach continued to come from Boston through Mendon to Hartford and on. And of course, why did the inns flourish? Why did the bakeries flourish? Why did commerce flourish? Was because we made sure that there was commerce coming via the stagecoach right through Mendon. Down Hartford East, sort of, Neck Hill Road, coming up the knoll on Neck Hill Road, looking at the town, seeing the steeple of the Unitarian Church, seeing the post office, which was Rebecca's, right? So, and the people in the post office seeing the stagecoach, okay, get ready, the mail's coming, the people are coming, the money's coming. So that's another reason why he's so important. And now we have the last gravestone we're going to learn about, Ephraim Lee. So you see this lovely headstone, Ephraim Lee. And this story, my heart just throbs when I hear this story. This story about Ephraim and his daughter is going to yank on your heartstrings, make you feel so sad, and also at the end make you feel so proud of what Mendon's past is all about. So let me tell you the story about Ephraim Lee. Ephraim Lee was a respected Mendon resident and church member. A shoemaker by trade, he lived in the old Dr. Willard house down by Nickmuck Pond. He was held in high regard in Golden Age Mendon. His death in 1828 left his daughter Susan heartbroken and destitute. You see, she was only 4 years old. She was so sad. She cried and cried. To make matters even worse for little Susan, her mother Abigail had died when Susan was only 4 months old, and now her father was gone too. How sad is that? And Abby Taft Lee, Susan's mother, was the widow of Putnam Taft, and she had a son, stepbrother to Susan, Putnam William Taft, from that first marriage. Later life, Susan recalled the extreme gloom and melancholy of the day. Many mourners were so overcome with grief that they had to sit on the nearby stone wall to mourn. She had become an orphan, along with her brother. Susan was taken in by her aunt and husband, Sally and Jared Denson. They operated a farm in the Chestnut Hill section of Mendon. Susan's stepbrother Putnam, also orphan, was sent to live with relatives in Worcester. This headstone represented heartbreak and sadness for the very young Susan Lee and Putnam Taft. As the years went by, Putnam and Susan realized that they both had developed a love for reading. Putnam shared books with his stepsister when he visited from Worcester, and in 1847, Susan Lee married William R. Houston, and she became a seamstress in Providence. But she continued to stay in touch with her brother, for whom she had the greatest respect. Their mutual love of literature continued through their adult lives. And in 1872, Putnam told his sister Susan that he intended to build a public library in their ancestral home of Mendon, a town that they both loved. But unfortunately, Putnam died suddenly. Susan Lee Houston used the $1,000 that she inherited from her brother to fulfill his dream. She created the Taft Public Library in 1881 using the existing brick building at 3 Main Street, which is now your Mendon Historical Society building. It was in use as a library at that address until 1920, when Rosa Taft purchased the current library building for the town. So we can see that this 4-year-old orphan girl who sat sobbing on this very stone wall at her father's burial in 1828 rose above the difficulties of her early life, and we certainly owe a debt of gratitude to Susan Lee Houston and to her brother, Putnam Taft. Great story. This concludes our walking tour of Old Cemetery. Thanks for coming. I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts to bring you back to Old Cemetery. Here's a few random names that you'll find in Old Cemetery. Hope Still Reed, Silence Howe, Thankful Rawson, Comfort Rockman. Interesting and intriguing names, wouldn't you say? Hopefully those names lure you back to Old Cemetery to learn more. The Mendon Historical Society did a great job today. I think they deserve a round of applause.
Thank you. Also, John, the undertaker, also deserves a round of applause.
Dick Grady too. Everybody here, they all did a wonderful